Late one evening, on a quiet stretch of road, far from prying eyes, an encounter unfolded that would challenge perceptions, shatter assumptions, and expose the deep-seated realities of prejudice in its rawest form. Elijah Carter, a young man with an unwavering sense of calm and dignity, was driving home after a long day. His car, a modest sedan, carried him through the night, his only companion the steady hum of the engine and the scattered thoughts of the journey ahead. But as he turned onto that lonely stretch of asphalt, headlights appeared behind him, bright, blinding, insistent. The telltale flashes of red and blue lights followed, cutting through the darkness like an unspoken accusation. Elijah pulled over, his heart steady but his mind racing. For a black man, being stopped by the police wasn't just an inconvenience. It was a moment suspended in uncertainty, an encounter where even the smallest misstep could lead to irreversible consequences. The officer approached, his steps purposeful, heavy, deliberate. Elijah lowered his window slightly, just enough to hear the voice that soon barked an order with no preamble, no courtesy. "Step out of the car?" Elijah, calm but not submissive, asked the question any reasonable person would. "What's the reason, officer?" But there was no answer, only silence, tense and oppressive, before the officer leaned closer, his tone sharper, his intent unmistakable. Elijah hesitated, his hands visible, his movements deliberate. Knowing that any action could be misconstrued, his calm demeanor seemed to aggravate the officer further, as if dignity itself was an affront. At that moment, Elijah had no idea who this man was, nor did Officer Ray realize whose life he was about to disrupt. But what happened next would set into motion a chain of events that neither of them could have anticipated. This wasn't just a traffic stop. It was the beginning of an unraveling, a collision of power, identity, and justice. A moment where an unchecked bias met a quiet, unshakable resolve, and it would leave one man questioning everything he thought he knew about authority, respect, and the weight of his own actions. What happened next would change Officer Ray's life forever. To understand the events of this night, we must first understand the two men at the center of it. Their paths were different, worlds apart, yet they were destined to collide in a way neither could have foreseen. Elijah Carter was not an ordinary man. At 29 years old, he had already achieved what many could only dream of, a meteoric rise through the ranks of law enforcement to become the newly appointed Inspector General of Police, a position he had earned through unwavering dedication, unmatched intelligence, and an unshakable moral compass. But Elijah's journey was far from easy. Born and raised in a modest neighborhood, he grew up in a world that often dismissed him before he could even speak. His mother worked long hours as a nurse, while his father, a construction worker, instilled in him the values of hard work and integrity. Yet the reality of being a young black man in America was always there, looming like a shadow. Flashbacks to his teenage years revealed the constant barriers he faced, the assumptions, the mistrust, the ever-present gaze of suspicion. It was a lesson Elijah learned early. His skin was his introduction, and often his only offense. But rather than let bitterness take root, Elijah made a decision that would define him. He would rise above it, not by ignoring the system, but by becoming a part of it and working to change it from within. With scholarships and sheer determination, Elijah pursued a degree in criminal justice, graduating at the top of his class. He entered the police academy with a quiet resolve, standing out not just for his skills, but for his empathy, a rare quality in an environment often hardened by cynicism. As the years went on, Elijah became known not just for his competence, but for his courage. He faced racism even within the ranks, enduring comments and actions meant to undermine him. But Elijah's focus never wavered. Now, as the youngest Inspector General of Police, Elijah was proof of what resilience could achieve. Yet, even in his success, he remained grounded, aware of the prejudices that persisted, waiting to test him at every turn. Then there was Officer Ray, a man shaped by a very different set of circumstances. For 20 years, he had patrolled the streets with a badge on his chest and a chip on his shoulder. To those who knew him, Ray was a product of his environment, a man who had embraced power but failed to balance it with accountability. His colleagues called him old school, a term often used to mask his tendency to profile and escalate unnecessarily. Over time, his record showed a troubling pattern, disproportionately targeting minorities, filing vague reports, and letting his biases dictate his actions. But Ray didn't see himself as the problem. To him, the world was changing too fast. The authority he once wielded without question now came with scrutiny, a scrutiny he resented. His disdain for these changes only deepened as his own career stagnated. Unlike Elijah, Ray hadn't risen through the ranks. He remained a patrol officer, his ambitions long eroded by bitterness. Ray's biases weren't born overnight. They were the result of years of unchecked behavior, reinforced by an environment that often prioritized loyalty over ethics. To Ray, people like Elijah represented everything he resented: change, progress, and accountability. And so, as Ray stepped out of his car that night and approached Elijah, he carried with him not just the weight of his own prejudices, but the culmination of years of unchecked power. He didn't see Elijah Carter, the Inspector General of Police. He saw a young black man on an empty road, someone he could intimidate, someone he could control. But what Ray couldn't see was the tide that was about to turn. Two men, two lives, two paths that could not have been more different. And on that dark road, their worlds were about to collide in a way that would expose everything Officer Ray thought he knew about power, respect, and consequence. As the moments dragged on, the stillness of the night was broken only by the chirping of distant crickets and the low hum of engines. Yet, inside the car, the tension was thick, pressing against Elijah like an invisible weight. Officer Ray, fueled by years of unchecked authority and simmering resentment, took one look at Elijah and saw not a person, but a threat, a symbol of everything he believed was wrong, a target to be controlled. "Officer Ray," I said, "step out of the car now." "Elijah, I don't understand. What's the reason for pulling me over?" "Officer Ray, you are speeding, 30 over the limit. This road isn't a racetrack, boy." But Elijah knew better. He had been driving just under the speed limit, as he always did. And this wasn't just a mistake. This was a lie, a fabrication to justify a confrontation that never should have happened. Yet Elijah knew this game. He had seen it before, played out on news reports, heard it in stories from his friends and family. He knew how easily a calm moment could spiral into chaos. So he stayed composed, refusing to give the officer the reaction he seemed afraid to have. "Elijah, officer, with respect, I wasn't speeding. If you have evidence of that, I'd be happy to see it." "Officer Ray, listen here. You're not in a position to argue. You either step out of the car or I'll make you step out. Your choice." For a brief moment, Elijah considered his options. Comply and risk further humiliation, or stand his ground and risk something worse? But his years of experience told him there was only one choice: remain calm, controlled, and above all, alive. Elijah opened the door and stepped out slowly, his hands still visible. But even this small act seemed to irritate Officer Ray further. "Officer Ray, what's a guy like you doing out here at this hour? Drugs? Stolen goods? You don't just cruise around roads like these for fun." "Elijah, I'm heading home, officer." "That's all." "Officer Ray, you sure about that? 'Cause I've seen plenty of your kind pulling all sorts of stunts out here. You'd better start talking straight before I make things harder for you." Ray wasn't interested in the truth. He was interested in control, and in his mind, control came from dominance, from making Elijah feel small, feel powerless. But Elijah wasn't the man Ray thought he was. "Officer Ray, pop the trunk. Let's see what you're hiding." "Elijah, I don't consent to a search. Do you have probable cause?" "Officer Ray, I am the cause, son. Now open the damn trunk." Elijah, realizing the futility of resisting further, presses a button on his keys. The trunk pops open, revealing nothing but a neatly organized set of documents and a gym bag. Ray rifles through the contents with growing frustration. Then, his hand lands on a sleek black leather wallet. He flips it open, and his face changes. And there it was, the moment Ray had unknowingly stepped over a line he could never uncross. Inside that wallet was a badge, gleaming under the faint glow of his flashlight. Inspector General of Police. But instead of shock or respect, Ray felt disbelief. He didn't recognize the title, didn't understand its weight. To him, it was just another tactic, another excuse. "Officer Ray, what's this supposed to be? Some kind of fake badge? You think flashing this nonsense is going to get you out of trouble?" Elijah doesn't respond immediately. He watches the officer carefully, his calm presence unshaken. "Elijah?" "That's not a fake badge. It's who I am." "I'd suggest you put it back and think very carefully about your next step." "Officer Ray? Nice try, kid, but I've seen enough fake IDs to know a fraud when I see one." But what Ray didn't realize, what he couldn't realize, was that his actions were being recorded. The dash cam in his car, the body cam on his chest, even Elijah's phone resting on the passenger seat, all silently capturing every word, every gesture. And soon, the world would see what kind of man Ray really was. "Officer Ray, I've got a situation here. Send another unit." The stage was set. What began as an ordinary traffic stop had become a battle of egos, of perspectives, of justice itself. But, as the night unfolded, it would be Officer Ray, not Elijah, who would face a reckoning. Elijah's composure tested. Elijah stood motionless, his hands clasped behind his back as Officer Ray rifled through his belongings. Each item the officer touched. A set of neatly folded clothes, a gym bag, a worn notebook, felt like an extension of Elijah's dignity, now being publicly dismantled. But Elijah had been here before. Not on this road, not with this officer, but in a life where his integrity was constantly questioned, his accomplishments always overshadowed by the assumptions others made about him. His calm exterior was a shield, but inside, memories clawed their way to the surface. Moments he had long buried, but never truly forgotten. Flashback. Young Elijah, no older than 12, stands in a small convenience store. The shopkeeper, an older man, watches him intently from behind the counter. Elijah picks up a candy bar, walking to the register, but before he can pay, the shopkeeper grabs his wrist. "Shopkeeper, I saw you slip something in your pocket. Empty it, now!" Young Elijah, "I didn't." "Shopkeeper, don't lie to me, boy. I know your type." Elijah's mother enters the store, her face a mixture of confusion and anger. She demands an explanation, but the shopkeeper doubles down, insisting Elijah is a thief. The flashback ends with Elijah standing outside the store, tears in his eyes, as his mother hugs him tightly. It was moments like these, moments of unearned humiliation, that shaped Elijah's resolve. As he grew older, he realized that fighting the system from the outside wasn't enough. He had to step inside, to climb higher, to wield the power that had so often been used against him. Back to presents. "Officer Ray, what kind of man keeps his car this clean? You trying to hide something?" "Elijah, no, officer, I just keep my car clean." The response, simple and nonchalant, only aggravates Ray further. He slams the trunk shut and steps closer to Elijah, his voice dripping with frustration. "Officer Ray, you think you're smart, don't you? Standing there all quiet, acting like you're better than me." Elijah's silence was not an act of defiance, but a survival tactic. He knew that every word he spoke, every move he made, would be scrutinized, twisted, and used against him, and so he stood still, letting the storm rage around him. The sound of approaching sirens pierces the night, growing louder until 2 additional police cars pull up. 2 officers, both middle-aged white men, step out, their expressions unreadable in the dim light. Officer Ray waves them over, his demeanor shifting slightly as he speaks to them. "Officer Ray, got a live one here. Says he's some big-shot cop, flashing fake credentials. Thought you might want in on this." The 2 officers glance at Elijah, their expressions immediately hardening. They exchange a knowing look, the kind of silent communication born from years of shared biases. The arrival of backup only made things worse. Instead of diffusing the situation, their presence amplified the hostility. To them, Elijah wasn't a man of distinction or achievement. He was just another suspect to be dealt with. One of the new officers, Officer Bradley, steps closer to Elijah, his tone patronizing. "Officer Bradley, you know, it's easier if you just admit what you've done. Saves everyone a lot of time." "Elijah, I haven't done anything wrong." "Officer Bradley." They all say that. The second officer, Officer Mills, begins circling Elijah, like a predator sizing up prey. "Officer Mills, you're awfully calm for someone in trouble. Makes me wonder what you're hiding." Elijah's patience was being tested in ways most could never imagine. He was outnumbered, surrounded by men who had already decided he was guilty, and yet he stood his ground, his composure unbroken. Meanwhile, Ray retrieves the badge he had tossed aside earlier, showing it to Bradley and Mills. "Officer Ray, take a look at this. It claims he's the Inspector General of Police. What kind of title is that anyway?" "Officer Bradley? Inspector General? Never heard of it. Sounds like something out of a bad TV show." But while the officers laughed, the audience understood the gravity of their mistake. The badge wasn't just a symbol of Elijah's rank. It was a reminder of how little these men knew about the man they were trying to break. In that moment, Elijah's calm wasn't just a strategy, it was a statement. A quiet, unspoken message that no matter what they said, no matter what they did, they could not take away his dignity. Officer Ray. Well, looks like we've got ourselves a problem here. Hope you're ready to cooperate, Inspector. This night's far from over. But what none of them realized, and what none of them could have known, was that this night and their actions were being recorded. And soon, their words, their laughter, their decisions would echo far beyond this dark, empty road. An unexpected call. The tense standoff is interrupted by a burst of static from Ray's radio. A sharp voice from police headquarters cuts through the tension, filling the silence like a thunderclap. Dispatch. All units, be advised. New Inspector General of Police conducting undercover operations in your area. Ensure all personnel exercise extreme professionalism and vigilance. This is a priority alert. The officers freeze. The words hang in the air, heavy with meaning. Ray's expression falters for a brief second. Before he recovers, his arrogance shielding him from the full weight of the message. Officer Ray. Must be a coincidence. Doesn't mean it's him. The backup officers exchange uneasy glances. Officer Bradley steps closer to Ray, lowering his voice so Elijah can't hear. Officer Bradley. Ray, you think it could be him? The badge, the car, the calm, it all adds up. Officer Ray. No way. This guy's just another punk trying to play games. HQ's message doesn't change a thing. Elijah, still standing tall between the officers, watches their whispered exchange with quiet intensity. He speaks, his tone steady and composed. Elijah, you just made the worst mistake of your career. Officer Ray. Big talk for someone in cuffs. You think a fancy title's gonna scare me? I've dealt with your kind before. Ray's words were laced with defiance, but beneath his bravado was the flicker of doubt, a sliver of unease that even he couldn't suppress. And for the first time that night, the balance of power began to shift. Ray's radio crackles again, the voice from HQ sounding more insistent this time. Dispatch. Officer Ray, confirm status on suspect. Be advised, failure to properly identify the Inspector General could result in immediate disciplinary action. Repeat, confirm suspect status. The tension among the officers escalates. Ray stiffens, his grip tightening on his radio as he responds with a forced calmness. Officer Ray. Suspect detained. No confirmation on identity yet. The backup officers shift uneasily. Bradley leans toward Ray, his voice hushed but urgent. Officer Bradley. Ray, maybe we should let him go if HQ finds out we... Officer Ray. We're not letting him go until I say so. Elijah. HQ won't need to find out. They already know. That dashcam of yours? It's been streaming live to the command center since you pulled me over. Officer Ray. You're bluffing. But Elijah wasn't bluffing. Every word, every action, every second of this encounter had been recorded, watched, and judged by eyes far beyond the dark stretch of road they stood on. Elijah takes a small step forward, forcing the officers to step back slightly. His presence now carries a weight they can no longer ignore. Elijah, your career, Ray, your reputation, everything you've built on this badge, it's crumbling as we speak. You thought tonight was about me, but it's not. It's about you and your actions. The backup officers, visibly shaken, lower their postures, stepping away from Elijah. Officer Mills clears his throat nervously. Officer Mills, Ray, maybe we should, double-check, just to be sure. Officer Ray, no one's going anywhere until I say so. Elijah lets out a quiet sigh, shaking his head slightly as if disappointed. He turns his gaze toward Ray, his tone shifting to one of authority. Elijah, Officer Ray, as the Inspector General of Police, I am ordering you to stand down, right now. The words hit like a gavel in a courtroom, undeniable and final. The authority in Elijah's voice left no room for argument, no space for doubt. The balance of power had shifted completely, and Ray was standing on the losing side. The sound of additional sirens grows louder, and within moments, 2 unmarked vehicles pull up. Senior officers step out, their expressions a mixture of shock and anger as they assess the scene. Senior officer, Officer Ray, step away from the suspect. Now. Ray hesitates, but the presence of the senior officers leaves him no choice. He steps back, his hand trembling as he unclips his holster. The other officers remain silent, their expressions a mixture of confusion and fear. Ray's world, built on arrogance and unchecked power, was crumbling beneath him. And as the senior officers approached Elijah, the truth became undeniable. One of the senior officers salutes Elijah, their voice filled with respect. Senior officer. Inspector General Carter, we apologize for this incident. Rest assured, it will be handled. Elijah nods, his composure intact as he addresses the group. Elijah, I trust it will. This isn't just about me. It's about every person who's been treated this way. Make sure it doesn't happen again. And in that moment, Ray understood. This wasn't just the end of his night. It was the end of everything he thought he could get away with. Elijah Carter wasn't just another man he could intimidate. He was the system Ray had abused for years, finally holding him accountable. Scene reopens with Officer Ray pacing near his squad car, his radio in hand, sweat glistening on his brow. The unmarked vehicles parked nearby seem to loom larger as the senior officers speak with the backup team. Ray's demeanor is no longer commanding. It's frantic, almost desperate. Officer Ray. HQ, this is Officer Ray. I need confirmation on the new Inspector General of Police. Repeat, confirm the identity of Inspector General Elijah Carter. Dispatch. Confirmation received. Inspector General Elijah Carter is conducting an undercover operation. Officer Ray, you are to stand down immediately and await further orders. It was in that moment that Ray's carefully constructed sense of power began to crumble. For years he had operated unchecked, believing himself untouchable. But now the truth was undeniable. He had profiled, humiliated, and disrespected the most powerful law enforcement officer in the nation. Officer Bradley, we're done for. This is career suicide. Officer Mills, what were we thinking? Why didn't we stop him? Senior officer, Officer Ray, step away from your vehicle and hand over your badge and weapon. Now. Ray hesitates, his pride warring with his fear. Slowly, he unclips his badge and gun, placing them in the senior officer's outstretched hand. The weight of his actions seems to hit him all at once, his shoulders slumping as the gravity of the situation sinks in. Elijah's response. Elijah steps forward, his calm demeanor commanding attention. The officers stand silently, their eyes fixed on him. Despite the humiliation he has endured, there is no anger in his voice, only purpose. Elijah, what happened tonight isn't unique. It's not the first time, and unfortunately, it won't be the last. But that's exactly why I'm here, to make sure this system changes. Elijah, because I've spent my life watching people like you abuse the authority given to them. And I know that anger, while justified, doesn't change systems. Accountability does. Elijah, racism in law enforcement isn't just about individual actions. It's about a culture that allows those actions to go unchecked. It's about a system that protects the guilty while punishing the innocent. And it's about men like you, Officer Ray, who think a badge is a shield from accountability. The officers around him lower their heads, guilt etched across their faces. Elijah pauses, letting his words sink in before continuing. Elijah, I became a police officer because I believed in justice, real justice, not the kind that targets someone for the color of their skin or their perceived lack of power. And tonight, you reminded me why that fight is so important. Elijah. Officer Ray, Officer Bradley, Officer Mills, you will report to Internal Affairs first thing in the morning. A full investigation will be conducted, and every second of tonight's encounter will be reviewed. You will answer for your actions. No excuses, no justifications. This isn't just about me. It's about the countless people who've stood in my place without the privilege of a title or the protection of a badge. Officer Ray, Officer Bradley, Officer Mills, you will report to Internal Affairs first thing in the morning. A full investigation will be conducted, and every second of tonight's encounter will be reviewed. You will answer for your actions. No excuses, no justifications. This isn't just about me. It's about the countless people who stood in my place without the privilege of a title or the protection of a badge. And so, the tide began to turn. What started as an abuse of power became a moment of reckoning. For Officer Ray, the fallout would be swift and severe. For Elijah Carter, it was another step in a lifelong fight for justice. And for the system itself, it was a reminder that change doesn't come quietly. It comes when people demand it. Officer Ray's world unraveled faster than even he could have imagined. Within days of the traffic stop, an official investigation began. Internal Affairs combed through every second of the dash cam footage, every report he'd ever filed, every complaint that had been buried over the years. The evidence was damning. At the heart of the investigation was a disturbing pattern. Years of racial profiling, baseless arrests, and misconduct swept under the rug by a system more interested in protecting its own than serving the public. But this time, there would be no rug large enough to hide the truth. The public hearing drew national attention, a spotlight shining directly on Officer Ray and the systemic failures that allowed him to operate unchecked for so long. Witnesses came forward, one after another, recounting their own harrowing encounters with Ray, stories of intimidation, humiliation, and fear. Stories that echoed Elijah's experience on that dark, isolated road. Flashbacks of witnesses testifying, a young man describing being handcuffed for no reason, a mother in tears over her son's wrongful arrest, a teenager recounting a traffic stop eerily similar to Elijah's. Each story was a brick in the wall of evidence sealing Ray's fate, and as the hearing progressed, the weight of his actions became impossible to ignore even for Ray himself. But the hearing wasn't just about one man. It was about a system that had enabled him. The police department, under immense public pressure, announced sweeping reforms: mandatory bias training, increased oversight, and the establishment of an independent review board to handle misconduct cases. Changes that were long overdue, but still just a first step. For many, it wasn't enough, and maybe it never would be. But for the first time, there was movement, a crack in the foundation of a system that had stood unchallenged for too long. Through it all, Elijah Carter remained the steady force of change. He didn't seek revenge or retribution. Instead, he used his platform to demand accountability, not just for Ray, but for the countless others who had suffered under the same system. His story became a symbol, a rallying cry for those who had been silenced, a testament to the power of resilience and determination. Elijah's rise to Inspector General of Police wasn't just a personal victory. It was a beacon of hope for a nation desperate for change. He became a mentor, a leader, and a living reminder that the fight against racism isn't won in a single battle. It's a marathon, one that requires strength, courage, and the willingness to confront uncomfortable truths. What happened on that dark road was more than an encounter between a racist cop and a determined young man. It was a turning point, a moment that forced a system to look in the mirror and acknowledge its flaws, a moment that inspired others to demand more, not just from their leaders, but from themselves. And for Officer Ray, it was the end of the road. Stripped of his badge, his reputation in tatters, he became the cautionary tale he had always believed himself immune to, proof that no one, no matter how powerful they think they are, is above accountability. Elijah Carter's story isn't just a story of triumph over adversity. It's a reminder that real change is possible, but only if we demand it, only if we fight for it, and only if we refuse to look away. In the end, Elijah Carter's story wasn't just about a single moment or a single man. It was about the choices we make when faced with injustice. The choice to stay silent or to speak up. The choice to retaliate with anger or to respond with resolve. And ultimately, the choice to fight for a better future, not just for ourselves, but for everyone. Elijah often says, "Power doesn't corrupt. It reveals who we truly are." His rise to Inspector General of Police didn't change who he was. It revealed his unwavering commitment to justice. Even when faced with humiliation and disrespect, he chose to hold firm, to reflect the values he fought to uphold, and to inspire others to do the same. Elijah's journey is a testament to resilience, a reminder that no matter how deep the roots of prejudice run, they can be challenged, uprooted, and replaced with something stronger. His story teaches us that justice isn't a destination. It's a choice we make every single day. And now, the question falls to you. What would you do if you were in Elijah's shoes? Would you have kept your composure? Would you have stood firm against years of systemic bias? Would you have chosen justice over anger? We all face moments in life where the choices we make define not only who we are, but the world we leave behind. Elijah chose courage. He chose justice. What will you choose? Racism doesn't end in a single act or a single story. It takes all of us, together, to demand accountability, to challenge bias, and to create a world where everyone is treated with the dignity they deserve. If Elijah's story moved you, don't let it end here. Share this video, start a conversation, raise awareness, and most importantly, be the change you wish to see. Your voice matters. Your actions matter. Together, we can ensure that stories like Elijah's don't just inspire change, they create it. The journey begins on a quiet, dark road, where the hum of tires against asphalt is broken only by the sudden, jarring wail of a police siren. Here, the tension is palpable. As Officer Ray steps out of his patrol car, the music shifts. A sharp note like a blade slicing through the stillness underscores the hostility in his voice. Imagine a badge glinting under the harsh beam of a flashlight, a badge that holds the weight of integrity and authority. And now, picture the disbelief etched on Officer Ray's face as he realizes the truth. Reenactments bring to life the pivotal moments, the confrontation on that dark road, the tense standoff as backup arrives, and the quiet power of Elijah's composure amidst chaos. Symbolic visuals carry the weight of the story, scales of justice, a shattered badge lying on a courtroom floor, and the steady march of a diverse crowd demanding accountability. Each image tells a piece of the story, reflecting the layers of racism and resilience woven through Elijah's journey. Key moments. What would you do? The choice is yours. In this story, every visual, every sound, every word works in harmony to convey a message larger than a single incident. It's about justice, it's about change, and it's about the power of storytelling to ignite both. Elijah Carter stood not just as a man in a uniform, but as a symbol of resilience, justice, and unwavering resolve. His story isn't just a tale of overcoming adversity, it's a lesson for all of us. A lesson about the choices we make, especially when faced with the harsh reality of injustice. Elijah often says, "Power doesn't corrupt, it reveals who we truly are." It's up to us to choose justice over prejudice. These words aren't just a reflection of his experiences. They're a call to action for every one of us, a reminder that the power to shape the world lies in our hands, in the decisions we make, and in the justice we demand. And now we turn the question to you. What would you do if you were in Elijah's shoes? Would you have the strength to stay calm, to stand firm, to use your power not for revenge but for change? These are questions we must all ask ourselves, because injustice doesn't end with one person's actions. It ends when we all take responsibility. Your voice matters, your choices matter. Together we can ensure that Elijah's story isn't just remembered, it's a spark that ignites real change. If this story moved you, don't let it end here. Share this video with someone who needs to see it. Start a conversation about the world we live in and the world we want to create. Every step forward begins with awareness, with courage, and with a refusal to accept the status quo. Elijah Carter's story is a testament to the strength of the human spirit. It's a reminder that even in the face of prejudice, dignity and justice can prevail. What will your story say about you? The choice is yours.